Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, enjoy.
Your name. John Grayson used to be an aspiring writer, working hard towards his dream through high school and university. Yes, used to be. After working 3 days straight, revising his novel as per the advice of an editor, he finally had his first novel ready for publishing. But right after he pressed send and rested his head on the desk for some shut-eye, he found himself inside a random apartment he didn't recognize. There was no white room, no god or angel, no Rob lacking entertainment, just a quick displacement. Technically, he woke up once before this, a few hours ago, to the grating sound of the alarm, but he thought it was a dream and went back to sleep with a nerdy grin. However, waking up in the room again, he decided to turn the TV on. Tony Stark attacked in Monaco. Who was the attacker? The pretty news reporter continued as his jaw almost touched the floor, but the matter-of-fact announcement echoed in the room. John's mind started buzzing. This wasn't a joke, but real national television. Iron Man 2 had come out 20 years ago, so there was no need for Marvel to pull this kind of stunt at this point. Unless this was the set of some reality TV show he didn't remember signing up for, he was really in a world of superheroes right now. When he rushed to his personal computer, which sat above a simple desk, and searched some keywords on Retro Google, the new world unraveled before him. Tony Stark, Professor Xavier, Captain America, and the works. Well, shit, John trembled half in fear and half in excitement. He had woken up in Marvel, and as much as he wished it to be a dream, his stinging cheeks, which he pulled without an ounce of mercy, only made him tear up further. I am cooked. He closed his eyes for a moment, accepting his fate. The world of Marvel wasn't kind to normal people. He wouldn't even know when a random car thrown by Hulk would reduce him to a red stain on the asphalt. Not to mention the criminal rings and organizations that treated the Geneva Convention as a to-do list. As someone who knew the dangers of this world, John felt his heart skip a beat as a blue screen blinked before him. Almost like it had waited for this moment. Of course, a system would follow transmigration. However, this didn't seem like the typical system he had seen in novels. This one had 3 tabs, but the other 2 had a lock symbol on them. Initializing emotion farming system, please wait. The line was followed by a merry jingle that made him gulp. Emotion farming system, it was a trope he knew well. The protagonist would make others feel strong emotions like love, hate, or fear and get points he could exchange for powers. Should he start flaming people online? Well, Twitter just launched here, so it might work. I doubt it would be a good source though. John looked at the loading screen in front of him. A cat similar to one in Japanese anime waved at him in the middle. In such settings, becoming a hero or terrorist was more economical. People would look at him with gratitude or pure terror depending on which route he took. The points were sure to come. However, John didn't have the heart to be a hero, nor did he want to risk being a terrorist. He was a simple, powerless writer who had only thrown one punch once in his life. System loaded. Congratulations on being chosen by the emotion farming system. The system's lines were dry, unlike his inner turmoil. But that clinical coldness helped him calm down a little. His eyes narrowed as the next string of words appeared. Tutorial is being generated. Confirming the host's world. Assessing danger level. Generating appropriate task. John looked at the passing words in absolute silence. Then with a sharp ting, a new panel arrived. Mission. Gather 100 EP. Time limit. 5 days. Reward. Access to skill shop, access to John Grayson's bank account, and a random rare-rated skill from the shop. Failure. Removal of the emotion farming system. John let out a sigh of relief. At least the system wasn't killing him for failure. But the system was his only advantage here. Losing the chance to gain power in this world wasn't a good thing. Not to mention the bank account. He needed money to eat even if he had powers. Sure, he might not die in any of the following events, but he wasn't exactly the type to gamble. And if he was being real, New York faced an Avenger-level threat basically every Tuesday. He would actually die of constant stress before any villain got a hold of him. Regardless, what gave him solace was that the system didn't try to force him down a path. He was free to choose how he wanted to do this, and for that he felt grateful. Glancing at the big fat 0 on his EP balance and then at the keyboard on the faded desk, a smile tugged on his lips. He wasn't a fighter and nowhere unstable enough to hold people at knife point on the daily. He didn't have that type of dog in him. But there was something he could do. A way to farm a shit ton of EP in this world. After a short internet search, he confirmed the absence of famous novels, manga, and anime from the previous world. No Dragon Ball, or the Big Three, no Vinland Saga, Edgerunners, or Vagabond. Not just the works, even their creators aren't here. At this point, he just felt sad for these people who would never know of peak fiction. John had loved reading from a young age, there wasn't a form of media he hadn't consumed to the fullest. And he had become even more obsessed with famous works after he wanted to become a writer. Nothing stirred emotions like a proper story. From anger to sadness, hate to love, stories evoked some of the strongest emotions in him and in millions across the world. He still remembered the first time he cried while watching Your Lie in April. That bittersweet feeling 5 centimeters per second left him with, and the way Psycho Pass made him look at the world through a new lens. Countless stories had taught him countless lessons. They had given him hope, made him cry, and kept him up at night. That was the magic that drew him to his dream. A writer's gotta write, there was no competition, this was the only way he could move forward. He didn't have to worry about this method failing, these stories in his head had already proven themselves in a world with much harsher competition. And as someone who had read them 100 times, hoping to learn how these wonderful tales came to be, John had almost memorized them all. When he pulled his chair and sat in front of the blank screen, with the wind bringing the noise from the busy streets outside, he had no fear of failure in his movements. The work he had chosen to write first had left his heart fluttering, worried, and stressed till the ending scene, only leaving him with a mix of relief and quiet fulfillment. After a series of quick clacks on the graying keyboard, the name of the work appeared on the empty notepad page. Your Name. If John had to sum up what Your Name made him feel, it was a mixing between howling in frustration while kicking his feet like a girl. The story was his first romance and had him start a romance series binge, nearly destroying his grades in high school. Makoto Shinkai had done a great job at setting the atmosphere and the dynamic, not to mention the escalating dread that reached its peak during the climax. If it hadn't ended the way it did, John was ready to fly to Japan and give Makoto Shinkai a personal visit. And now, he was determined to make these unsuspecting readers go through the same. Hoo-hoo, this'll be fun. 53 comments 0 vote. Finding Victi readers. John had chosen to drop Your Name into the Marvel world to complete his mission. And he was determined to make these unsuspecting readers go through the same anxiety he went through. Hoo-hoo, this'll be fun. Leaving his misplaced enthusiasm aside, John now had to translate the visually pleasing scenes on a page. He had no skills for drawing, so that was out of the question. Words were his only weapon. If he spent too much time on the details of the surroundings, it would kill the flow and become a word soup. There were disadvantages in converting a movie into a novel, but that was standard stuff. And since there were disadvantages, advantages followed too. Unlike in a movie where one would look at the scene from the camera's perspective, a novel allowed the audience to look at the world through the character's eyes. It allowed them to peek deep into the character's state of mind. That deep and personal connection was a huge advantage that movies didn't have. So, John made sure to lean into it. The first chapter started in the future, the point where the adult Taki and Mitsuha live in Tokyo, both following their routine while pondering over the vague feeling in their hearts as they are looking for someone. He made it clear that two people took turns with their lines, completing each other's statements with the use of bold and italics. He didn't change their names, nor the place where it was set. If he chose to Americanize the plot, it would leave quite a mess regarding the supernatural and traditional elements of the work. Sure, it might increase the chances of the work being ignored, with the Japanese names and setting, but John believed that the readers connected with the stories, not the names. The Japanese names might make readers hesitate at first, but the cream always rose to the top. The very fact that he knew of this movie, having seen it enough times to memorize the plot despite living halfway across the globe in a country where watching anime would get you bullied until COVID, was enough of an answer. And if it doesn't work well, I have other options. John could have started with them, but he chose Your Name because it held a special place in his heart. It was the first work that got him into romance, he was never able to look at that genre the same way again. And it also served as the perfect opportunity to test if Japanese works would survive from the get-go or he'd need to shelve them for a while. By evening, he had written 3 chapters and uploaded them on a writing site that was this world's equivalent of Fiction Press, Rivolta. From the moment he had hit upload, John sat at his seat till midnight, fidgeting nervously at each increase in the number as he refreshed the page every minute, only leaving for the bathroom when it became unbearable. As the minute hand went past 12 and a new day started, John looked at the webpage with a twitching left eye. After 7 hours, he had a whopping 70 views in 5 EP. Unlike his expectations, all types of works were being posted on this site. Star Wars fanfics, fantasy originals, Lord of the Rings spin-offs. It was a festival. It didn't even take a minute before his post was pushed off the first page of recently uploaded, getting lost in the sea of obscurity. He would have gone to a publishing house with a fantasy that would work, but he didn't have enough time for the screening process and nowhere near enough money to get a ticket to Japan. Not that they'd readily accept a work written in English. Online writing platforms were his only choice, and this was the biggest one he could find. The only thing keeping him from full-on panic was a quiet comment left on Chapter 3. At Nahag - this is interesting, can't wait for the next chapter. Seemed like this reader was a veteran of the site and read many romances, seeing their enthusiasm took some of his anxiety. If his reactions and emotions counter, John would have gone past a 1000 EP by now. This isn't gonna be easy. Letting out a dead chuckle, he leaned back into the creaking chair. Even though he knew that nothing as convenient as the post going viral on some forum would happen the moment he released the chapters. Still, a man could dream. He was already in the world of Marvel, something he had only seen in fiction. What stopped another miracle like this? Is this what they call copium? Tastes wonderful. Letting out a tired sigh from the building tension, John decided to crash on the mess of a lumpy bed in his room. The moment his head crashed on the cheap detergent-smelling pillow, worries he had been keeping at bay poured in. Who owned this place? Did he have any family here? What would he do about the utility bills? Food, rent, how was he supposed to survive? Why couldn't this fucking system give me access to the bank account from the start? Stirring up unnecessary drama like this is some web novel. The weight on his head increased as he rolled over, focusing on the stains that marred the ceiling for some much-needed focus. He was probably in a world where he had no one, knew no one. Honestly, he had nothing to lose here. It'll be okay, he reassured himself, his hand gently patting his chest. Tomorrow will be a great day. If the readers weren't coming to him, he would find them. With his resolve hardening into stone, John went back to the computer, clacking away like he had a grudge against the keyboard. By the time morning arrived, John had created a dozen burner accounts and posted about the novel in all active reader forums and blogs he could find. Since he had started doing this after midnight, not a lot of people had seen his posts, but the EP had reached 15 somehow. When considering the 100 EP goal within 5 days, he had another 67 hours to get 5 more EP to fill the day's quota. John crashed on the bed with heavy eyelids, but before he could sleep, his phone rang. As he opened the tacky blue flip phone and answered, a heavy voice came from the other side. It wasn't a call from any editor that happened to see potential in what he posted, it was a professor from the university he attended. Seemed like he really had no relatives or guardians here, so the professor could only call him directly after he had skipped classes for 3 days. John wondered how he got into a university, and not just any university. He had become a freshman at Empire State University. On scholarship too. Looking at his barebones flat, not a book or pen in sight, no one would believe it. Even he didn't believe it. Must be the almighty system. Showing the system his gratefulness with a salute, he let out a sigh. The system had given him a clean identity and even access to education, but the task had given him tunnel vision. He hadn't even left the room yesterday and hadn't bothered to look into his bag to find more information. I don't got any cash either. John placed his books and university ID into the bag, drinking instant coffee for breakfast after digging his pants for some crumpled notes. The small fridge had some food, it would last him for a few days if he rationed carefully. But anything beyond that would give him a headache and an extreme case of hunger. The university provided lunch, that was a silver lining at least. The idea of microtransactions and crowdfunding for digital content hadn't formed yet either, and he had no computer skills to create something like that himself. The shop should have something like that, right? If the skill shop didn't sell skills, he'll take the damn thing to court. Regardless, he might need to look for the big J. Still, he was more excited to reach the university. It wasn't anything innocent like excitement to learn, to hell with that. Empire State University was home to important figures in Marvel. And the thing with important figures in such a plot was that they gave more points when interacted with. If I can get even one of them to read, hey. 31 comments 0 vote. The unsuspecting Gwen. John felt his heart-thumping excitement to reach the university. It wasn't anything innocent like excitement to learn, to hell with that. Empire State University was home to important figures in Marvel. And the thing with important figures in such a plot was that they gave more points when interacted with. If I can get even one of them to read, hey. John's smirk widened as he locked the door and walked down the stairs that smelled like blue cheese. The commute was a rush of bodies and heavy smoke from the busy metropolis. The passers-by, on their way to work or university, seemed to care little about his mental turmoil as he kept opening and closing his phone, his eyes burning a hole through the system panel. He had posted the 4th chapter before leaving. It was an evil cliffhanger, hoping it would get him something extra. Too bad he couldn't check the website constantly anymore. Just you wait. He looked at the iPhone ad plastered on billboards, clenching his fist to get a better phone for his browsing addiction. Passing through the gates of the university, John passed by the happy students who chatted on the way to class as shouts from the ones who practiced in the field echoed, not to mention the several strong perfumes of the girls buzzing around the place. But what caught his eye was a big guy picking on another student by the lockers. The bigger guy had a jacket with the name Flash on the back in bright yellow. And the second guy looked especially scrawny in front of him. The guy had this nerdy energy with his checkered shirt and dull pants. To any jock, he was basically a walking invitation for bullying. Flash Thompson and Peter Parker. The names just resurfaced in his mind on their own like a whale. John, involuntarily, had become the audience just like the other students. No one seemed fazed, almost like this was a daily occurrence. It probably was. But Peter should have his powers at this age. No, he shouldn't even be in university right now. John's head spun the more he thought about it. Given that Tony was just attacked during the Monaco Grand Prix, things didn't match here. Regardless, Peter should have stopped the bullying by teaching Flash a lesson by now. But it wasn't that this friendly neighborhood Spider-Man didn't choose to fight back, he just couldn't do it. That was when a blur of blonde passed by him. It was a girl in a light blue hoodie, tight black pants, and squeaky Velcro shoes. She slipped through the crowd holding a bunch of books close to her chest, with a professor lagging behind her. But before she could reach Peter, the bell rang. "Don't be late to class, Peter. See you at lunch." Flash slipped away laughing, a few of his cronies running after him. The other students also dispersed as the professor started to focus on sending them off to class, leaving the blonde-haired girl and Peter by the locker. "So, it's Gwen Stacy Root here." John allowed his feet to take him to the faculty office first, nodding happily that there wasn't any MJ in sight. My goat Peter deserves better. As someone who had spent the better half of his life in a Spider-Man onesie, John felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders as he talked with the professor. After giving the reason for his absence with random bullshit go, John entered his class. Professor Henderson was a quiet man. He didn't ask him why he came in late or why he was absent before and allowed him to sit down. Biochemistry. His face hardened like stone as lectures passed by with him nodding along, making the professor beam at this mountain-like concentration. "I see, I don't understand shit." He slumped in his seat as he had just gone through 100 rounds of UFC against Khabib. He could see his scholarship flying away in real time. Still, it wasn't all bad. Just before lunch, he got to sit next to Gwen in the lab. The professor was running late, so the students were left to their devices for a moment. John glanced at the blonde next to him and then at the stack of books before her. She kept tapping the counter at a steady rhythm, lost in her own mind. Thankfully, it wasn't just textbooks. There was a novel tucked away below, with a title he actually knew. A niche title not many read because of its problematic plot developments and inability to stay true to its genre. It's good to see this book is in this world too. His mind churned, trying to find the opening line. If you look at it any harder, you'll burn a hole through it. However, she was the one who started. Although the tone was dry, John's eyes met Gwen's slight smile. He had been thinking of how to start a dialogue with her, and here came his chance. "I didn't expect someone here to be reading this." John shook his head. This book was a bit of a train wreck. "Well, I guess that makes both of us weirdos." Gwen shrugged. "I wouldn't go as far as to call us weirdos, awkward at most." He shook his head. "What are your thoughts on the ambitious supernatural crime thriller with a dash of sci-fi?" The start was interesting to say the least. Her wry smile was enough of an answer. As their chat continued, he had confirmed that Gwen loved reading, as he knew. Before Peter, He had to see how many EPs she would give, as an important member of the cast. The ending did leave a lot to be desired, and the third act was honestly too ambitious. John nodded knowingly as a sharp glint flashed in his eyes. Finding the perfect moment for the shameless plug. I actually found a novel online last night that has a great start so far. Honestly, I can't wait to see where it goes. He sighed the way readers do when they find a masterpiece before it reached 100 chapters. That agonizing pain of having to wait for releases but still gritting your teeth cause you know it'll be worth it. Online, Gwen showed an interest along with some apprehension. Around this time, there wasn't a lack of interesting works being abandoned or taking a nosedive in the online sphere. However, none of this would happen to the work he had posted. Yeah, it was real interesting. As John spoke, Gwen started to look sold on the idea. He had to put a little meat on the hook to get the fish. A guy and girl switching bodies. That's a disaster waiting to happen. Although Gwen enjoyed crime thrillers, such silly plots were always welcome from time to time. They worked as good palate cleansers between the heavy and gritty thriller novels she read. And she could see the passion in John's eyes when he spoke. That alone was enough to convince her to give this one a try. She didn't know him well enough, aside from the name, as he always blended in the background. So, watching the enthusiasm and genuine love for the work he recommended, she didn't want to insult him by not checking it. During lunch, instead of the cafeteria, she took a bag of chips and a burger to the computer lab after saying goodbye to Peter. With the work's name fresh in her mind, she searched Rivolta and found it in no time. The author's name made her chuckle as it matched the protagonist's name from the book she had discussed with John. John Doe 6769, not very John Doe, is he? Glancing over the title in the spoiler-free setting she heard about, this looked like a proper romance comedy. Settling into her chair while taking a bite of the burger, Gwen clicked on the first chapter. 27 comments, 0 vote. First taste of the cliff. Settling into her chair, while taking a bite of the burger, Gwen clicked on the first chapter. But the differences from the mainstay of the genre emerged from the first line. Unlike other romances, this one had an introspective tone. There wasn't any purple prose or exaggerated actions. Only a quiet, ambiguous routine of two adults in Tokyo who were searching for someone without even knowing if the other existed. Tokyo, that's new. It wasn't every day one would come across a novel set in another country, unless it was fantasy. Regardless, she was a bit peeved by the short first chapter and hoped the second one was longer. And her demands were answered. The second chapter was longer. It started with Taki, the boy, in Mitsuha's body after their first switch. Guys, she visibly shrank at the scene where Taki, in Mitsuha's body, started to feel up the breasts. This may be funny from a neutral point, but as a woman herself, a chill went up her spine. If someone switched bodies with her, she prayed he didn't do this. Still, the real comedy started when Mitsuha supposedly returned to her body. The reactions of others around her, especially her little sisters, to her becoming normal compared to the her from yesterday was fun to watch. Comet Tiamat, yeah, better remember that. Gwen could feel that this would be important. The chapter followed Mitsuha getting flabbergasted by Taki's demolition of her entire character, and the who are you? In her textbook. Another interesting part was the sake made from the chewed rice and learning about the shrine maidens. It made Gwen lean in with focus. I am sick of this town. Make me a hot guy in Tokyo in my next life, Paul AC. This part made Gwen chuckle hard at this line. This was exactly why people said to be careful what they wished for. Because Mitsuha got her wish in the very next chapter, in the most literal sense possible. The third chapter mirrored the second one, but with Mitsuha in Taki's body. And just like how he felt up her breasts, she too had a striking curiosity regarding that thing. It's fine since he also did it. She would too. Not every day one would get an experience like that. Double standards be damned. However, Mitsuha followed Taki's daily life with a surprising elegance. A bit too much elegance. The way she talked with his friends, the closeness with Okudera, Taki's secret crush, and her love for cafes. Gwen almost spat her drink when Mitsuha asked Okudera to take her skirt off. The writing was smooth and light as Mitsuha left her entries in the diary app on Taki's phone with precision. And before sleeping, she remembered his question and wrote her name on his palm. Gwen couldn't stop her smile as the focus switched between the two, showing them mess up while figuring out that they were switching bodies for real. She had already heard of this detail, but it was handled very naturally with a solid build-up. The following events left her chuckling: the Naruto list, the friends and classmates being shocked at Mitsuha's tacky masculinity, and Taki's Mitsuha feminine side as they kept snapping at one another by writing to one each other's bodies. Their dynamic was cute and super charming to read about. The two had lived each other's lives, been in each other's body in the most literal sense, and they bounced off one another well. She could see the romance blossoming in real time. They will be dating for sure. Gwen was convinced as Mitsuha had landed Taki a date with Okudera. Wait, this is not the development I expected. She leaned forward, hanging on each word. However, the more she read, the more relaxed her brow got. And a smirk finally appeared when Okudera spoke. You used to like me, right? Now you like someone else. It was the official confirmation of the romance's start. With the two switching bodies, it was bound to happen. And she looked forward to more of their shenanigans, but another twist awaited her. What do you mean they didn't switch bodies after that? Gwen's fist struck the wooden desk, rattling the keyboard. There was a sense of dread choking her as she hurriedly clicked on the next chapter, hoping one of them would go find the other. And the first line made her sigh in relief. Taki was on his way to find Mitsuha. That was a good sign. But a lump started to form in her throat the more she read. The drawing, the trip to the countryside, and finally the couple that claimed to know of Mitsuha's hometown. But the moment the name of the town was spoken, the atmosphere got heavy. The comet from the chapter before resurfaced, just not the way she had thought of. That Tiamat comet had landed right on Itamori, but 3 years ago. The impact had killed everyone in town. How were they switching bodies 3 years across? Gwen almost choked when the list of victims appeared, and right there at the end was a name she wished wasn't there. Mitsuha Miyamizu, 17. The chapter ended right there. Why the fuck would you end it there? Gwen howled. She almost turned the computer upside down hoping the rest would show up below, but things didn't work like that. With a groan, she slumped into the chair, finding a little solace in the comments of her fellow readers going through the same frustrations as her. This author, honestly, he had no human decency. However, Gwen's complaints were cut short as the door to the computer lab opened. Was I too loud? I was definitely too loud. She slipped under the desk while shutting off the computer. She thought a professor had come into the lab to check why the lights were on, or someone had reported her shouting, but it was someone else. Can't wait to check the progress. It was John. His steps were practically radiating energy as he skipped over to a computer in the far corner. He didn't have a free period after lunch, but who cared about that right now? Gwen Stacy is feeling happy +5 EP. Gwen Stacy is feeling happy +5 EP. Gwen Stacy is anxious +7 EP. Gwen Stacy is greatly shocked +9 EP. Gwen Stacy is fuming +10 EP. With each notification, his smile widened and hardened into something not possible by human standards. If he had gone to the lecture, the professor might have called the psych ward on him. But how could he not be happy? He had gotten 33 EP from her alone, adding to the total of 15 he already had, and the extra 15 he had earned since coming to uni thanks to the almighty cliffhanger. He had a total of 63 EP before 24 hours had even passed. All this before the climax, the most anxiety-inducing part, that has yet to arrive. Of course, he had to attribute all this to his genius plans and 5,982,987 IQ brain power. Let's check them sweet comments stewing in unease. He felt eager to see their frustrations, because he too went through the same thing. The views had tripled from before, but comments were mostly concentrated on the last chapter. Nicaria, how could you be this cruel? Are you even human? At Jondo 6769. Beastmaster 123, this cliffhanger deserves crucifixion. Padoru, do it after the novel is finished, please. Amanahak, don't worry guys, I'll keep the author well fed, my basement is super comfy. He felt a bit comfortable watching the unchanged state of the comment section, no matter the world, but he vowed to be more careful about his identity. No matter how comfy a basement was, it was still a basement. Better not let them find out who I am. John shuddered at the very thought of being discovered, considering what he had in the chamber. Hey, that was when a voice came over his shoulder. 14 comments 0 vote. Mission accomplished. Better not let them find out who I am. He shuddered at the very thought of being discovered, already knowing how fans got with authors. Hey, that was when a voice came from behind him. Wah! John gave a not-so-brave cry and swung around, his arm flailing in a wide arc. It would have hit the speaker if she hadn't leaned her head back at the last moment. Easy there, camper. Gwen chuckled, wiping the non-existent sweat of her brow. Almost knocked me out. Ah, well, John controlled his pounding heart, looking between her and the computer screen. The only saving grace was that he hadn't made the mistake of logging into his writer account. Good thing he wasn't the type to speak when he got excited, or his secret life as an author would have ended before it even began. You couldn't wait either, huh? Gwen smirked, and he tried to mirror it, sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. Man, I can't wait for the next chapter too. Tell me if it's posted. With that, Gwen started for the door while glancing back at him, letting out a sigh of relief in her mind. I hope he didn't hear me scream. She scratched her cheek as he belatedly waved goodbye. So damn embarrassing. She could feel her calm and composed image crumbling in real time. However, John didn't give two shits about that. He slumped on the table as soon as the door clacked shut, like a puppet with cut strings. That could have ended badly, getting exposed as the writer on the very first day. Was there something more embarrassing than that? I need to be more careful from now on. John vowed not to check on the novels unless he was home. He had to resist the urge somehow. No, he would double-check everything even in his house before logging in there as well. But as the pounding heart calmed down, he thought back on what had happened. Gwen sneaked up on him without a sound. Sure, he had all his focus on the screen, but he wasn't that distracted. He could swear he had heard her shoes make squeaking sounds against the tiles when they parted ways near the cafeteria. And now they made no sound. Not to mention the natural dodge. Sure, he was no Mike Tyson, but even he didn't know when or how his arm swung like that. But Gwen very accurately moved back just enough to dodge, almost as natural as breathing. Not to mention the calmness after that. There's no way, right? His fingers poked at the keyboard, filling in the search bar. He hadn't searched for Spider-Man before because he was under the assumption Peter Parker was still a young kid. However, things were different now, and so was the Spider Hero. Just the word spider was enough to fill in the rest. A long list of the Daily Bugle's reports stretched out on the supposed Spider-Manace. All featuring a hero in white and black spandex accented with magenta webs and topped off with a hood. There was no Spider-Man, but a Spider-Woman. And who this Spider-Woman was had just hit John like a straight punch. There goes my wish to get Spider-Man autograph. John had to scratch that one off of his bucket list. But Spider-Woman, huh? His mind went back to Gwen. Recalling the blonde hair and blue eyes, it did match her style from the Spider-Verse movies. However, she had developed quite a bit compared to that version, as they were in university now. John had tried his best not to look at her weirdly, but the hoodie and tight pants could barely hide anything, not to mention the figure in the spider suit. The suit drew too much attention to her thighs and chest. Let's put a pin in that for now. There is a bigger problem at hand with this Marvel timeline. He could only hope that this world didn't throw more curveballs at him. Because he wasn't sure if his heart could take any more of them. Regardless, he went home in a jolly mood, almost floating over the stairs. That cliffhanger was still getting him EP, the number rising towards 100 at a steady pace. John held back the urge to drop another chapter since the momentum hadn't slowed yet. No matter if he cooked, ate, took a shower, or took a shit, his eyes stayed squarely on the EP counter like a stalking lion. The moment his EP crossed 90, around midnight, the accumulation faltered from 1 EP every 10-15 minutes to 20-25 minutes. Time to deploy. John acted like he was launching a missile. And it wouldn't be wrong to think that either. Chapter 5 had to build up from the cliff of the last chapter. Which it did so very naturally. The chapter started with an out-of-body experience for Taki, as he watched Mitsuha looking at the falling meteor that split in two, heading for her. And all he could do was shout out her name and tell her to run, with nothing reaching her. Taki's turmoil and uncertainty about Mitsuha's existence became intense. Then he went to the body of the god, where Chudria's sake was stored after the last ceremony. And after drinking the sake, he was back into Mitsuha's body. The image of him feeling up Mitsuha's breasts while crying always made him laugh like an idiot. And just as the chapter had lulled everyone into a sense of safety, with Mitsuha and friends getting ready to save the town, no one took them seriously. The mayor, the people, even Mitsuha's young sister, her father even tells Mitsuha, Taki, to go and visit a doctor. The chapter ends on him turning towards the mountain beyond Itamori, wondering where his body was. Then he bolts there, telling his friends that the plan was still on. This chapter was also a cliffhanger, but it was a positive one, a type that built anticipation in the reader about how the protag would solve this problem. And as they keep thinking about it, the EP will roll in. With a smirk that would put Light Yagami to shame, John watched the EP cross the 100 mark in 20 minutes flat. You have completed the tutorial mission. Congratulations. Pixelated fireworks went off on the blue screen in front of him. Honestly, where did their budget go? Regardless, John was more focused on the following panels. Transferring the details of John Grayson's bank account. It didn't drop a card in his hand, but simply unlocked a memory in his mind. $5K in the bank is workable for now. John still had to visit the bank to get a card issued, but it was way better than chewing on day-old lettuce and calling it dinner. Skill shop is now unlocked. This is something. John inhaled the moment he switched to the second tab. The panel took a dark, more purplish color, with a list of sections on the left and his balance at the top. Common, rare, super rare, ultra rare, it was the standard rating fare. Common had basic skills from drawing to martial arts to singing, with items that spanned from Virgil's plastic chair to Nerf guns and then straight up tanks and ballistic missiles. All increasing in price with the item. This section had a price range of 110,000 EP. Then came the rare section. Sharingan, Ackerman's Physique, Dead Bone Pulse, Cleave, Base Hockey Package, Symbiote, Unawakened Zanpakuto, and the works. There were even items and weapons from famous anime and game worlds. The price range went from 10,000 EP all the way to 1 million. The super rare section had John sweating. Kryptonian Physique, Saiyan Bloodline, Doomsday's Adaptation, The Balance, Tibetan Monk Techniques, and much more that had him shaking. The items were even more powerful, with Thanos' Gauntlet, Tony's Phoenix Buster, and even Noble Phantasms. The price went from 1 million to upward of 1 billion EP. John sat down on his bed, looking at the measly 105 EP, he didn't even have the heart to look at the ultra-rare section. It was like going to a yacht dealership with $10, a dream, and a pocket full of ignorance. It seemed like even the system felt bad for him, sending another panel his way to distract him. You have received a rare skill coupon. It has been stored in the inventory. 26 comments 0 vote. Anonymous no more. You have received a rare skill coupon. It has been stored in the inventory. No need to worry, there will come a day when I can buy ranked stuff like candy. With a sharp punch in the air, John recentered himself. He looked at the first tab where another section had appeared. It was an icon that looked like Apple's calendar app, right below his EP counter. This inventory could be used to store anything he purchased from the shop, regardless of the size. And inside that stretch of grids, he saw the coupon in the topmost corner, flashing with an enchanting purple. He mentally focused on the grid and the coupon materialized before him. It was a thin metallic card that was shaped like an old train ticket. After washing his hands and praying to every god in the observable universe, he used the ticket. It was just a mental command, though. Then a transparent circle appeared on the system panel. He could see sensors behind the glass, like a metro ticket reader. The ticket pressed flat against the glass and a red light scanned its surface, before it burst into a wave of purple particles. It was like someone had released a box full of purple fireflies in his room. The fireflies rushed into his body through his mouth, ears, and nose, leaving him coughing and horrified. However, the system cared less for his horror and sent a new panel his way. Congratulations, host, you have got Hanma Bloodline Unawakened. John blinked at the reward with a creeping sense of fear. There was only the Hanma Bloodline he could think of, and it belonged to a monster that could stop an earthquake with a punch, swim with sharks like they were clownfish, and, at last, had the supreme power of schizophrenia. Now, would his body, a skinny boy standing at a respectable 5 feet 9 inches, feel anything when the bloodline integrated into him? If the novels and fanfics were anything to go by, he was in for a world of pain. Fucking hell, and right on time, the pain washed over him. From the skin on his scalp to the toes, the searing pain burned through his entire being. It was like someone was pricking his skin with a hot needle. John collapsed on the bed, frothing at the mouth as his body bent in ways he didn't even know were possible. He could hear his bones creak and his muscles stretch, his ears ringing as voices from beyond the wall started to echo in his mind. Was it an hour or 10? He had zero clue. The only thing he knew was the light in his room felt like a laser. When the pain and the itchy calm returned, John could feel the difference in his breath. His eyes adjusted and took in the world in a new light. His ears were sharp enough for him to hear people talking next door. It sounded like a whisper, but still. This is insane. His rising chest strained against the shirt so much that the button had come loose. If he moved a bit too suddenly, his hands might rip through the linen sleeves. Standing up, the pants felt tight against his thighs as the ends went above his ankles. There was only one mirror in the house, and he stood before it with genuine astonishment. 3 inches, that's how much he grew in height. In this world and even in the previous one, John wasn't the type to have a great physique. He was the tall, lanky guy that could barely put on muscle. His current version was similar too, at least it used to be similar. You can wash clothes on these damned abs. His excitement went up an octave as he unbuttoned his shirt. Even if he didn't hit the gym for these muscles, he worked hard for them in his own way. He was allowed to gloat. Still, even though the Hanma bloodline wasn't awakened, it had given him a very athletic and ripped body. The good thing was that he didn't turn into a muscle monster. His body looked like it belonged to someone who had trained while keeping agility, practicality, and aesthetics in mind. The bad thing was that none of his current clothes fit him, aside from that one oversized gray hoodie and the baggy acid-washed jeans. Even his shoes felt a bit tight. Anyway, at least he had one outfit. I'll have to go shopping tomorrow. John wiped the sweat off his brow, feeling every breath to the fullest. After the morning classes ended, he would head for the bank immediately. But more than that, he was super interested in his current strength. He could feel the power building up in his forearms and biceps as he swung. The punch still felt like an amateur's attack, but it had serious power the way it whizzed through the air. If he tried it against the wall, he might have to wave at his neighbor while apologizing. Right as he was thinking of doing burpees to test his endurance, a new system panel appeared. Confirmed the completion of tutorial mission. Removing the anonymity filter. Please do not try to resist. What in the 7 hells was the anonymity filter? As if listening to his question, a new tab opened like when one clicked on a suspicious page that offered free anything. Anonymity filter. It shrouds the host in obscurity, making it harder for the world and its inhabitants to notice the host's presence and actions. So basically, this filter kept him hidden in the background, turning him into an NPC. But now he was standing under the stage light too. Wouldn't it have been better if he had the filter on him? Did that mean he made a mistake by completing the tutorial mission? If the description was anything to go by, he could have just lived in silence and survived. No, the filter is the system's function. It would have gone the moment I failed the tutorial. John felt like this was the system's safety net till the host could figure out what they wanted to do before the big players noticed. And to confirm his guess, the next panel shot up, covering his vision. Mission. Gain 1000 EP with a method you are comfortable with. Reward. A special subsystem to help with your chosen path. Failure. Time limit. Note. This will be the last system-issued mission. We wish you the very best in your endeavors. This is a very laid-back system, is it not getting paid enough? John chuckled, but it was good. At least there wasn't anyone pulling his hair like some helicopter parent. As for the subsystem, he couldn't wait to find out what it would be. If he had to make a conservative guess, it had something to do with the still-locked third tab. Sitting down on the cold floor, John focused on the EP points. He had around 127 at the moment, meaning he could get something useful from the common section. Most of the skills, like Jeet Kune Do, BJJ, Kyokushin Karate, lingered around 40 EP each. But he wasn't keen on buying martial arts skills at the moment. He still needed to test the limits of his body before making a decision on which style would suit him. What he wanted to buy was the drawing skill. He could barely draw a stick figure and always wanted to try drawing manga. Now he had his chance. And considering how many of the stories he had in his mind worked better in the manga medium, the purchase was a no-brainer. I can use this for novel illustrations too. John beamed, pressing the buy button like an impulse buyer. This time, a group of white fireflies swarmed his face. 24 comments, 0 vote. Bet. A group of white fireflies swarmed his face. The feeling of vertigo wasn't that bad this time. An impossible amount of knowledge passed through his brain. The tips of his fingers became itchy. His forearms and wrists turned sore like he had been rolling them for days on end. This weird, ticklish feeling lasted for 10 minutes, give or take. By the time John sat at his desk and pulled out his school notebook, holding the pen above it, the strokes of blue lines had already started before he could understand. An illustration of 2B formed on the page, one line at a time, each strand of hair, each contour of the face, and every curve came to life little by little. He wasn't sure how he did it, or why he used a certain line at a specific place, his body just knew what to do. However, it was a weird feeling, since aside from forming the mental image, he had no control over the process. Maybe I'll get used to it by drawing more. That was the most logical explanation he could think of for this disconnect between his brain and body. Now came the important part, his setup. He needed a tablet to illustrate and a better computer than this relic at his desk. Sure, he had $5K in the bank, but that was food and rent money. And it was 2010, the consumer tech hadn't boomed yet, unless he could get in touch with Tony Stark. John wouldn't hold his breath on that one. His fingers scrolled through the shop's common section. There he found the ultimate writer and illustrator setup. A Wacom Cintiq Pro 67 for the illustrations, and a PC decked out with the RTX 6090 and a Ryzen 420,000. He absolutely needed this for writing, the specs helped with typing faster and loading documents better. Anyway, who else would he spend the EP on if not himself? Easy buy just for that alone. John hummed a happy tone, eyeing the gleaming mass of RGB at his old desk. It was like placing a Bugatti's chassis on wooden wheels, but it was what it was. I mean, there are some good desks and massaging chairs here. John held his right hand back from going wild. 2 impulse purchases were enough for today. He would get a desk and chair through the money he had in the bank, it was more economical. Being responsible about spending was the key. Okay, time to earn your keep. John got to work, starting up the PC, but a short search through the storage made him click his tongue. No games in sight, the disappointment was immeasurable, and his day was ruined. So, with a heavy heart, he shed tears at the sight of Google Docs and got to typing on the new and smooth keyboard. Through the night of non-stop working, John had learned about a few changes that had happened in his body. First, he could probably go 45 nights without sleep and only get a mild headache. Second, he had become the personification of "I am so hungry I could eat a horse." He meant that in the most literal sense ever, which scared him even more. By the time morning came, the food he had expected to last a few days was gone. The only thing inside was a stick of butter he had taken a bite out of hunger. And even that wasn't enough for his body. By the time lunch arrived, he felt like his stomach was on the verge of eating its way out of his body. Thankfully, the lunch lady gave him a ton of food for some reason. And by pure chance, he found Gwen and Peter sitting nearby, looking right at him. Looks like Mrs. Rockefeller has a new fave. Gwen smiled as he walked over before tilting her head. I knew you looked taller today, but this is something else. Just some stretching. He sat down, fork already in the food. If it's that effective, you should help me stretch sometimes. Sure, tell me when you are free. John basically inhaled food as Gwen hit his forearm with a smile. He couldn't exactly tell her that a system gave him powers for hanging readers off a cliff, so he played along with her joke. More than that, he looked at Peter, who was watching them with a small smile. Hello, name's John. He extended a hand with a smile. Peter. Peter took his hand and gave it a respectful shake. As they talked over lunch, mostly just Gwen and John discussing the latest chapter, Peter nodded along from the side. He wasn't one to speak much, probably not comfortable around him yet. I am telling you, I couldn't sleep last night because of that jerk. I hope both sides of his pillow are warm. Gwen was still hung up on the ending, but it wasn't so bad. The EP had been rolling in all this time, and John already got half of what he had spent last night back, sitting at a comfortable 90 points. The time unraveling, Musubi, and the Twilight thing, it was so interesting learning about tradition and everything too. Gwen continued, honestly, I regret not waiting a little more, I could have read it all in one sitting. The wait is the best thing. John smiled. From his point of view, waiting was in fact the best thing. Oh, piss off. Gwen rolled her eyes as any reader would. You see this guy, Peter. Well, depending on the situation, waiting works, Peter answered slowly. I suppose. Not getting the follow-up answer she expected, Gwen quieted down before turning to Peter again. I bet you won't say that again after reading your name. Someone said bet. John looked over, finishing the mountain of food. Bet on whether Peter would still say waiting is worth it after reading till the latest chapter. She smirked. You in? $20 that he would say waiting is worth it. John placed his fork down. My $20 would beg to differ. There were slight sparks between Gwen and John, making Peter queasy in his chair. But before he could speak, the two had already grabbed him by each arm, as they exited the cafeteria, dragging him along. The computer lab is closed, you'll need the key. John turned to Gwen as they climbed the stairs to the third floor. On it, she raced down the hallway like an elite sprinter, eager to prove him wrong. Meanwhile, John turned to Peter, who still seemed out of it, getting caught between the two. Peter turned away from his new acquaintance's seemingly normal, but abnormally pressuring smile. It's nothing to worry about, buddy. John patted his new friend's back as Gwen arrived with the key. After spending 1 full hour, Peter binging the available chapters, they had the verdict. The answer was clear to the writer himself, because he could see the EP coming in. Peter Parker is astonished +2 EP. Peter Parker is anxious +2 EP. Peter Parker is greatly surprised +3 EP. Peter Parker looks forward to the following development +4 EP. Sure, it wasn't on the level that Gwen gave EP, but it was still something. At least this confirmed his theory about where he'd get the most EP from. On the other hand, Gwen's shining eyes landed on Peter as he read the last line and leaned back into the chair. This guy was a fast reader. And under that pressure, he started after a subtle cough. Since the story is so well put together, I think waiting is worth it in this case. There is no point putting pressure on the writer as it may result in them rushing and dropping the quality. Your words are logical, but I smell something fishy. Her eyes narrowed, looking between the two she had left alone for a bit. Oh, are those excuses I hear? John leaned in, putting his ear forward. Grr, fine. Gwen slammed two $10 bills in his hand and walked away pouting. After the door closed, John gave one bill to his partner in crime with a chuckle. Gwen will get mad when she finds out, Peter said. She won't, unless you tell her. Looking at the $10 bills in their hands, he was sure Gwen expected the cheating. She deliberately created the opportunity for it. Now, why would she do that? Let's go, we might get late for the next lecture. John looked at Peter, who also seemed completely oblivious to the matter. Yeah, let's go. 16 comments 0 vote, I love you. After the lectures ended, John made his way to the Empire State Bank, but found it closed. They stated some jargon about security checks and whatnot. In the end, he had to go home without money. But thanks to the $10 he got from Gwen, he was able to buy 2 pounds of steak and keep some change. He had salt and pepper at home with a half-eaten stick of butter, so he won't starve at least. Yeah, this is it. Until today, he had never enjoyed steak this much. Probably because of hunger, he found them irresistible today. Regardless, he started working on Chapter 6 of Your Name. He had already written it last night and just needed to read through to catch any typos. Thanks to the Hanma bloodline, his perception had become faster, and he found typos very easily now. Now, to mention the way his fingers danced on the keyboard, they were almost a blur now. Today, he was feeling devious, so instead of 1, he had decided to drop chapters 6 and 7 with an hour between them. Leaving the finale, chapter 8, for the next day. Now, let's see how they act after this wombo combo. John cackled while looking at the readers pouring in. The poor souls had no idea what would hit them. Gwen had just stepped out of the shower in her flat when the notification popped up on her PC. An email from Rivolta regarding the new update by John Doe 6769, the author she had followed and accepted notifications for. She didn't even bother to blow dry her hair or wear the clothes messily thrown on the pink duvet. By the time she could understand, her chair slid her into the desk, and her finger gripped the mouse, already clicking the direct link to the post. Adjusting the towel under her arms, her eyes followed the light but atmospheric words. The POV had switched to Taki Mitsuha as she woke up in the cave. While talking about how she cut her hair, Mitsuha got out of the cave and saw the destroyed Itamori, realizing that she had died as the memories came flooding in. No beating around the bush, huh? Gwen sucked in a sharp breath, wondering how Mitsuha would react to the information. However, the scene cut back to Mitsuha Taki on a bicycle, making his way up the mountain. That's when he gets pulled into a memory. The memory of the day Mitsuha visited Tokyo, thinking that it was the day of Taki and Okudera's date. Gwen's heart started beating fast when she saw how Mitsuha found Taki on a train. The only problem was that she realized this was 3 years before Taki had even known Mitsuha, way before the body switches happened. So, what followed was what she had expected. I know Taki isn't at fault, but I feel so bad for Mitsuha. In the corner of her heart, No, she wholeheartedly hoped Taki would say something, anything. And he did just that. He asked for her name. And Mitsuha gave him her name, alongside her ribbon, a piece of braided thread that connected the two across the river of time. If the chapter ends here, I will find this guy. Thankfully for Gwen, the chapter didn't end there. It continued with Mitsuha Taki reaching the mountaintop and shouting her name at the top of his lungs. Taki Mitsuha also did the same thing, shouting his name as loud as she could. The bold and italics from the first chapter returned. Two people called for each other. They were in the same place, but in a different time. Would they meet? Will they be able to get the answers they both wanted? Her mind raced as they got closer and closer, their hands passing by each other. The questions burned through Gwen as she scrolled, and the answer arrived. Twilight. She blinked at the word. It was already established as a time where one would meet with the supernatural. It was the perfect moment for the two linked with supernatural phenomena. And they met for the first time, fully knowing the other. This was the first time they had a proper face-to-face conversation. Mitsuha complained at him touching her chest. Taki's disappointment at her thinking he was hopeless at communication. The banter between the two was as cute as she had expected. But all good things must come to an end, and as Twilight's end approached, so did the end of their meeting. This is so sweet, Gwen felt her heart melting as Taki wrote his name on Mitsuha's hand. But that feeling soon turned to dread as Mitsuha vanished before she could write her name on Taki's hand. That feeling kept stacking as Taki, who kept trying to memorize her name, tried to write it on his palm but couldn't. What is your name? The chapter ended with Taki shouting, hoping the person he was looking for would hear him somehow, but that didn't happen. Gwen had the urge to punch through the wall, but she had just lost $20 today, and she didn't want to increase on that number. In the end, she could only massage her face to calm her nerves as she skimmed through the comments. Padoru, at Amanahak we leave it to you, big guy. David Adaroju, yeah, this is getting out of hand, we choose you, at Amanahak. Amanahak, don't worry guys, I just finished renovating my basement, it has TV, fridge, and even a king-sized bed, all we need is at Jondo 6769. Katie's 89, this doesn't sound like a joke anymore. Dragon Knight 240, I think they went past joking for a while now, lol. Gwen shook her head, still thinking it was just internet trolling. After clearing her mind and finally getting dressed, she was back on the computer, rereading the chapter. One habit she had picked up while reading crime thrillers was picking up hidden details during the second or third read. Surprisingly, that habit had rewarded her in this work, a romance novel, as well. The ribbon that Taki wore around his wrist, which actually belonged to Mitsuha, was mentioned from the first switch. So, Mitsuha's visit to Tokyo 3 years ago was already established. Then the Twilight poem came full circle, and the comet thread as well. But what she needed answers for was why Taki forgot Mitsuha. Was it because she died? Or was it something else that caused it? Finally, Gwen looked at the part where Taki crossed the river with the words, "One has to leave behind something most precious to them before crossing." That's where Taki got the sake Mitsuha had made and reformed the connection. To reach that place, he had to leave behind something precious. Now, in the context of that scene, what was the most precious thing to Taki? Mitsuha. Her lips muttered before she fully understood, it made perfect sense. The memory was the price to meet her again, even as they were 3 years apart on the line known as time. This is crazy, Gwen blinked at the screen, but something popped up in the corner. It was another notification from Rivolta, regarding an upload for your name's new chapter. It was like she was rewarded for finding the perfect answer, and she clicked on it with a smile full of glee. A double release, so, this writer does have some conscience. Gwen almost forgave John Doe for his cliffs before focusing on the chapter. The scene looked hopeful with Mitsuha working hard to save Itamori. Her friends were giving their best, and even the part where she stood against her father. But there was another point that filled Gwen with anxiety. Taki wasn't the only one who had crossed the boundary. Mitsuha had done it too. And almost as if on cue, Mitsuha started losing her memories. The name on your hand. If she could, Gwen would have reached into the novel and shaken Mitsuha. Thankfully, Mitsuha had remembered that part as well. She looked at the hand for an answer. And she got one, just not the one she had expected. I love you. Those 3 letters had Gwen looking at the ceiling as her eyes stung. 20 comments 0 vote, consider kidnapping, I love you. Those 3 words had Gwen looking at the ceiling as her eyes stung. Taki hadn't written his name, because he knew Mitsuha had crossed the boundary. And that meant that she had also left behind something most precious to her. So, instead of writing a name that she would get erased, he wrote what he felt, hoping it would stay in her heart and push her forward. And right as Mitsuha gathered her courage and started the evacuation process, the comet passed by from above. It broke in 2, one piece falling towards Mitsuha and the second passing over the younger version of Taki, who was still unaware and fully entranced by the beauty of it all. The chapter ended with a dull report stating that the comet had struck the town of Itamori, where the people were celebrating their summer festival, as Taki, in the future, looked at the still destroyed town, a single line etched onto his palm before leaving for Tokyo. His memories completely gone. Gwen was at a loss for words. She slumped in the chair and didn't speak or move for a full 10 minutes. The comment section was a mess of people threatening to kidnap the author yet again or crying over the confession moment. It doesn't sound so bad when you think about it. In that moment, even Gwen started to think the kidnapping, or in this case, relocation, wasn't so bad. EP, my sweet EP. John almost broke into a shoulder dance as the EP crossed 300 the following afternoon. The biggest contributor to that walked beside him as they exited the main building of the university after their morning lectures. That was a fun lecture, Gwen said, words that didn't belong together. He would have followed up on her tangent, but there was something that made him keep his distance from her. Gwen Stacy is considering kidnapping you +50 EP. That notification had kept him up all night. His first question was, why? Then he heard her talk about the reason the next morning, the double release of Heartache and The Cliff. He understood her thoughts. Still, why? Hey, why are you spacing out? Gwen tapped his shoulder, a small frown on her brow. Nothing, I was just imagining what you said. He nodded along to a topic he had no memory of hearing. Right, if someone did that writing scene with me, I seriously won't be able to take it. Gwen was talking about the Taki and Mitsuha scene from the last chapter. Would you like the body swapping part 2? John asked, stepping down the stairs. I'll pass on that. Just the thought of someone else in her body, feeling her up, was enough to make her shudder. You can't just take the best part, you know. That's not how life works. He chuckled, turning to Peter. Ain't that right, Peter? That would be correct. If something has advantages, disadvantages are sure to follow. Peter, who had been listening to them so far, answered with a subtle nod. Look at you two getting along. Gwen let out an exasperated sigh as they teamed up on her. All thanks to you, John smirked. If you are that thankful, give my $20 back. She demanded, faking a pained expression. Too late, already spent. Unbelievable. Gwen chuckled, thinking he was joking. But John had given $10 to Peter, and spent the remaining on food. Thinking of food made him hungry again. Today, even if he had to break into the bank, he'd have his money. I am not a fan of wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row either. He looked at his clothes, same as yesterday. If he suddenly didn't become a world eating champion, he would have used the $10 from yesterday in a thrift shop. Well, he couldn't do anything about that now. Unless he made a mistake of buying clothes from the system shop. Which at this moment didn't sound so bad. Anyway, about that Musubi Thin, Gwen paused mid-sentence, clutching her light pink bag as she faked looking at her wristwatch. I gotta go, I was supposed to meet Professor Henderson in the lab. See y'all tomorrow. Watching her storm off, John turned to Peter, who only shrugged. Seemed Gwen did this often, and he could guess the reason. I swear I heard something beeping in her bag. Duty calls, I suppose. John didn't dwell on it much and walked with Peter. Their destination was the main gate of the university. They were passing by the American football field, where the students who got an on-sports scholarship worked up a sweat in the blazing heat. There was a small crowd in the stands too, probably their friends or others waiting about. Since Gwen left, they hadn't talked much. Peter wasn't sure what he should talk about with John. It wasn't that John had made fun of any of his topics, and hadn't made any slighted remark even when he showed slight enthusiasm regarding Spider-Woman. He had been treated well, a bit too well considering how outgoing John was. However, there was something that Peter felt. It was more of an instinct he had learned after being picked on for so long. He isn't a bully, but something about him scares me. There was a chill that took over his body whenever John's expression went neutral since this morning. When people's expressions became like that, they usually relaxed, but that wasn't the case for him. Peter noticed the small adjustments he made, the way his eyes looked around, keeping a clear picture of his surroundings with subtle head movements. He made it look natural, almost. The only reason Peter could see it was that he was used to observing from behind. Right now, John was like a professional football player who scanned the field for any incoming aggressors, keeping track of everyone and everything around him. Is something bothering you, Peter? And his eyes happened to catch something. Flash. Peter, who could see beyond John's back, saw Flash charging at them in American football gear, minus the helmet. He's targeting John. Why would Flash do that? Peter had long learned not to use logic with him. At this moment, he had to push John, who was looking at him, out of the way. However, humans were creatures that operated in steps. They took in information first, the brain processed that information and sent the response for the situation, only then the body followed based on its capabilities. For someone like Peter, whose brain worked faster than his body, the disconnect was more pronounced. By the time he had even raised a hand, the collision had already happened. There was a sickening crunch that echoed, making Peter close his eyes and cover his face with the palms of his hands. However, amidst the gasps and silence, he heard the voice of his friend. "It's okay, Peter." John was still near him. By the time Peter opened his eyes, John had already turned away from him. Peter's eyes looked at the unfazed John, blood coating his right elbow. Then his gaze lowered to see Flash, groaning on the floor. He clutched at his bleeding nose, scrambling on the running track while cursing his head off. And if there was one thing worse than Flash messing with someone, it was Flash when someone fought back. Because then he wouldn't attack alone. Peter saw Flash's teammates coming over. They were laughing just moments ago, but now their faces turned grave. But even when facing this all, John's voice was as calm as ever. "You okay, bud?" he said, extending a hand to Flash. His voice seemed much deeper too. Flash's eyes were bloodshot, and it looked like he might swing at any moment. However, the moment he looked up at John, he stopped. The curses, the glare, the anger dripping off his face. It all vanished like smoke, replaced by a layer of cold sweat and fresh terror. "You look a little pale. Everything cool?" 19 comments 0 vote. Martial arts. "You look a little pale. Everything cool?" John asked as Flash got to his feet unsteadily. It's nothing." Unlike what others had expected, a fist fight, Flash walked away, clutching at his nose. "Flash Thompson fears you +5 EP. What?" John almost tripped getting that notification. The collision was so sudden that he had been out of it since the moment it happened. He was talking to Peter when he suddenly felt a sting on his back. It was like someone had aimed a heat ray at him. His body braced itself when a set of heavy footsteps closed in, one similar to an animal charging in, and his elbow shot out on instinct. By the time he understood what happened, Flash was bleeding on the ground with a busted nose as others whispered their quiet enthusiasm. "I was just being nice to him by helping him up, rude punk." John shook his head as the coach of the football team arrived belatedly, expecting to break up a fight. The crowd soon dispersed awkwardly as John wiped Flash's blood off his elbow with a wet tissue Peter had pulled out of his bag. The reddened elbow only stung a little when he applied the cream his good friend had handed over. The pain was like a cold breeze in summer, there for a moment, before completely dying down. "You stay prepared, huh?" John looked at Peter fumbling with the items in his big bag. Bandages, pain-relieving spray, gauze, painkillers, and more. Everything was arranged inside the bag along with the thick books. I have to be." Peter gave a wry smile. "They probably pick on him when Gwen isn't around. Is that what this was? Maybe John got targeted because he was with Peter. Someone vindictive like Flash would do that to isolate a person. If he didn't get the powers, this would have ended badly, very badly." Just thinking about it left a bad taste in his mouth. A normal world is already cruel, but the world of superheroes is much worse. He sighed, leaning against the bench as his shoulders finally relaxed. Peter's unsure voice brought him out of the reverie. "Do you train in martial arts, John?" "Just piano and calligraphy," he said. "I see." Peter took that as him deflecting the question, but that wasn't the case. "My mother made me learn them when I was like real young." John laughed. He really didn't learn any martial arts after all. What happened was all thanks to the Hanma physique's heightened senses and durability. "I used to practice till my fingers bled." "No way." Peter looked horrified. "I took lessons seriously until my mom." Well, John stopped himself from speaking further. Oh, I am sorry for your loss. Peter had interpreted that as John's mother dying. It will be awkward if I say she walked out on us when I was 11. He scratched his cheek. Well, it didn't matter much in this world. And he doubted his mother would give a shit, she was probably in the Bahamas living it up. John didn't care either, he was only able to find his love for reading and writing after that damned helicopter left. The only thing he hoped was that his father would move on and ask out that cafe owner Brenda. Don't disappoint me, Pops. He still rooted for them, knowing full well that he might never see it with his own eyes. That's enough of that, let's go. I gotta go to the bank too. John jumped to his feet, regaining his energy. John parted ways with him with a big smile, but on the way home, Peter couldn't help but think about their conversation. I feel like shit, he sighed into his palms, sitting on the bus. He thought John was cool, funny, outgoing, and more than that, he believed that John had it easy. The energy, the power to withstand Flash's charge, and the confidence to say what he wanted. To a gloomy kid, John looked like the guy who had it all. He was someone who wouldn't have to worry about anything. But that wasn't the case. Peter remembered the tired smile he had at the end of their conversation. It bordered on acceptance and was filled with guilt about something out of his control. Even the most perfect-looking people had their problems far bigger than what he had to worry about. I can't stay like this. I have to change too. Peter focused on the dim beeps coming from his bag. Inside, hidden in one of the hollowed textbooks, was a device that resembled a radio scanner. It was a modified scanner that could intercept police communications. He looked around the half-empty bus before pressing the device to his ears, hearing the chaotic crackle and words. Unit 349 come in, Unit, Empire State Bank. I repeat, there has been a terrorist attack at the Empire State Bank. Empire State Bank. Peter's eyes widened as the bus screeched to a stop at the red light. John said he had something to do at the Empire State Bank. Calculating the time and the amount of distance covered, the amount of time it would take for the police to notice and issue a call for backup, the result was obvious. John was at the bank right this moment. Hey, kid, are you nuts? The bus driver cursed as Peter opened the bus door from the driver's control panel and ran out. Amidst the blaring horns from pissed drivers, as the traffic lights turned green, and his thumping heart, Peter only thought of reaching the Empire State Bank. What would he do there? He could think about that when he reached the place. John never liked the banks, they felt slow and clunky, with that smell of rotten weight and drying patience. It was like these people were hired to just waste as much time as possible. He may have been a bit pissed because of yesterday's wasted trip, but there was truth in it. Even now, with the bank open, he had to stand in line for nearly 30 minutes, then he had to fill out 3 forms, which he had to stand in line to submit again. All that just to reissue a card, which would take another hour or two. Or you can drop by tomorrow again. The middle-aged lady, clearly fed up with her job, said without even looking up. Now I know who to offer up as hostage if this place is attacked. John sat in the waiting area next to a lanky white-haired old man reading a newspaper. Leaving the terrible thoughts behind, he pulled up the system panel. The sudden incident with Flash had left him uneasy. Maybe he was getting too complacent since he had decided to not go in dangerous areas. But life was seldom that convenient. Even if he refused to engage in dangerous situations, the danger would fall on his head. After all, if he was to mingle with people like Gwen and Peter, he was bound to get roped in eventually. He understood that a bit more because of Flash. The solution for this was rather simple. Either he locked himself in some bunker and kept uploading the novels, or he could continue as he was and focus on getting stronger. The answer was simple for John. The hermit life doesn't suit me, so pass on that. He was still in the prime of his youth. What was the point of living in Marvel if all he saw was 4 walls? Above all, he understood that he wouldn't be completely safe even that way. The better way was to continue as he was, make friends and get allies while building power. Of course, he had to be extremely careful, but that was only natural. If he wanted to enjoy his life here, he had to accept the danger that came with it. That was the trade-off. John stared at the 305 EP sitting in the balance. With that amount, he couldn't get anything powerful just yet, but he could at least get something that could help him at the moment. With that thought, he opened the system shop. 19 comments 0 vote. Choice made. John stared at the 305 EP sitting in the balance. With that amount, he couldn't get anything powerful just yet, but he could at least get something that could help him at the moment. With that thought, he opened the system shop. His eyes were on the base Sharingan, which cost 12,000 EP. The visual acuity he'd get and the ability to copy, with the Hanma physique, almost gave him shivers. The first problem was that he wasn't sure how the chakra and Uchiha jargon would be resolved. Because he could see the Uchiha bloodline for sale as well. Maybe the system would solve the issue for him, or he would be forced to buy the Uchiha bloodline to make Sharingan work. He wasn't sure, and he got no answers from the system in question either. In the end, he had to put a pin in that topic. Now, he dropped down to the common section. His eyes hovered over the martial arts skills. He had the Hanma physique, unawakened, but he had no combat experience. It was like a Bugatti without a steering wheel. All that power and speed but no ability to control the direction, that was a waste. The elbow to flash was pure instinct, and he wasn't planning on relying on that anymore. Any combatant worth their salt in Marvel would dodge that. He needed something that could help him direct his power into actual damage even if he faced a trained professional. Kyokushin Karate. This one was a simpler martial art, and full contact with powerful punches and kicks, and well suited for his body. John felt like it wouldn't take too long for him to get used to this. It went into the worth considering category. Capoeira, on the other hand, sounded difficult. Getting used to the rhythm and flow, it was more useful for someone acrobatic, like Gwen. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he had no plans on skipping on ground like a slug when 3 enemies could poke him full of bullet holes from 10 meters away. Pass. CQC, the moment John saw this one, he paused for a second. This was a system. It took advantage of karate, judo, boxing, Muay Thai, and even pencak silat for knife handling, but that bumped the difficulty curve a bit. Still, if he had time, he could digest this fast, at least that's what he felt like. This was a system that didn't commit to any one martial arts directly, trimming a lot of fat in the process. Not to mention that he could keep learning new martial arts, integrating them into the system without any stutters or incompatibility issues. But it cost 150 EP. Considering how much it gave, it looked fair. If it doesn't pan out, I will still have enough for Kyokushin Karate. John walked to the bathroom and entered one of the stalls in the far corner. Who could tell if he wouldn't start spasming as he did with Hanma's physique? Since CQC was a big combat system, he didn't want to take the chance. He sat on the closed toilet seat, the scent of the lemon-like freshener making him a little queasy. Even then, he bit down on a textbook from his bag and purchased CQC. The swarm of white fireflies, as large as a hive of bees, rushed into him. The burning hotness spread through his body. It felt like a dozen meat tenderizers struck all over him and racked over his bones. The pain wasn't anything compared to what happened during the physique integration. But it wasn't easy either. Still, John kept his back straight even as sweat poured down his face, dripping on the white tiles, clenching his hands tight till his knuckles turned white. He couldn't say anything about power, but his body had surely grown more used to pain and being uncomfortable. John had kept his eyes closed, seeing each move of the system in his mind. The punches, kicks, disarms, elbows, and throws. With each strike he witnessed, the red circle below started to grow. The conditioning continued for a full 20 minutes. And when he opened his eyes, John could see a circle, with a diameter of 4 meters, forming around him. It looked like a shooting target board. This was his range. With CQC getting less effective the further it went, he understood that internally. With this, I feel like I can get that annoying mosquito at last. John's eyes shone with a new fire as he wiped the sweat off his brow. That's when someone knocked on the door. Wait a bit, man. I am almost done, John answered, putting his book back into the bag, but the moment someone kicked the door. God damn, you want to wipe my ass for me or what? The swinging door almost struck him, but he had moved away just in time with a growl. However, what welcomed him beyond the door wasn't some poor guy almost shitting himself, it was the muzzle of an M16. Out, now, the guy spoke with a grainy Southwest accent. He was in full protective gear, helmet, vest, and the works. And this guy wasn't alone. As John stepped out with his hands raised, he saw the guy's partner covering the washroom's door. This is tricky. John felt his finger twitch, his heart beating against his ribs. He could feel a heat ray extending from the muzzle, landing on the left side of his chest. These guys had all blacked out gear, no patches, no indications. Most likely terrorists since they were too well equipped to be mere robbers. Considering this was New York in Marvel, this was practically routine work. If I follow them, I can get a better idea of how many there are and wait for the superhero of the day. John relaxed, at least he tried to. The guy pointing the gun at him turned his head to speak with his partner, chuckling at some internal joke. He said something in a foreign language. John could smell it. He's not taking me seriously. The moment he saw the guy's finger on the trigger relax, he lunged. His fingers wrapped around the cold barrel, pushing it away from himself. The man looked back in shock at the sudden tug. His finger tried to reach the trigger, but a blurry fist was already in front of his face, his only exposed part. The knuckles buried into his face with a twisted crunch. His face caved as blood splattered. The man's nose flattened under the fist as he went limp. The sound of the punch was like a strike of a hammer. The second guy turned around after hearing that sound, his gun swinging alongside his sight. But the only thing in his view was the flying body of his comrade. A grown man in full gear crashed onto him. He cursed as his body slammed against the washroom wall. The broken tiles crumbled behind him. Only then did he notice another body that followed under the shadow of the first. Just that this one was upright, a young boy that his partner was joking about being scared shitless. As soon as his gun clattered on the floor, he tried to reach for the pistol. But his wrist was pinned against the wall. Then a straight right dug straight into his armpit, a place unprotected by the vest. Gah! The man felt the wind knocked out of him as his shoulder cracked, leaving him gritting his teeth. But before he could even regain his sense of stability, another fist connected squarely on his face. His head bounced off the wall as the world went dark. John stood over the two unconscious and bleeding terrorists at his feet. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, but his breathing was deep and controlled. His knuckles had turned red, and they burned hot, but there was no pain. Just a sense of victory taking over his heart. Shit, I wasn't supposed to fight here. John almost screamed. He wasn't sure what came over him. How could he lunge at a guy with a damned gun when there was another behind him? Where did the confidence and courage come from? Wait, is it the body? His mind directly went to his thumping heart, the Hanma physique, that had to be it. Oh my god. Jakob, hey Jakob, what you doing, bud? Another voice closed in with the heavy boots, headed towards the washroom, calling out to the people that he had knocked out. Jacob, oi, answer me you cunts. 18 comments 0 vote, Winter Soldier, ... Jakob, hey Jakob, what you doing, bud? Another voice closed in with the heavy boots, headed towards the washroom, calling out to the people that he had knocked out. Jacob, oi, answer me you cunts. This isn't the time. John calmed himself, back pressed against the wall, right beside the two. They had already taken down the heavy door, so he couldn't use that. However, his hand very aptly pulled away at the helmet of the second guy he had knocked out, eyes following the barrel of the gun hovering before the door like he had done this 100 times. From the controlled breathing, John could tell the guy was out of his range. There was no point in grabbing the weapon at that distance. These guys had pistols and even grenades. If the guy decided to throw them in, he'd be toast. I don't want to test the strength of brotherhood between terrorists. John had to get close, and to cover the distance he needed time. And to create that necessary time, he threw the helmet through the door. In situations where tensions run high, the body reacted at the smallest changes in the surroundings. That was what happened with the third terrorist. The moment his eyes, that have been trying to scan the bathroom from beyond the door, registered the blur passing up, his finger squeezed the trigger. Flashes of yellow filled the passage as bullet casings tinkered over the tiles. His gun followed the blur that had come to a stop at his feet, a black helmet. Before he could even take another breath, two hands shot forward and gripped his wrists. And the white shoe that had just stomped on the floor started to rise, aiming for his head. Given the closeness, a kick like that wasn't possible without insane flexibility. However, when the heel connected to his chin, his head snapped upwards. An explosion of spittle, blood, and teeth splattering on the ceiling. John watched the man slump to his knees, and only then did he let go. After that, he quickly pulled out the earpiece from him and placed it near his ear. How many of them are there? His heart continued to pound away at his ribs as the line stayed silent for a moment, then the answer came. This is Ajax speaking. Did you check up on Jakob and Jacob? It was a voice laced with a heavy Russian accent, but aside from him, no one else spoke aside from faint static in Ajax's voice. Billy, did Spider-Woman arrive already? Billy. They were after Gwen. John's face hardened. Was this terrorist attack an attempt to catch Spider-Woman? If so, then why did he have to get stuck in the middle of it? No, John, focus, the milk is already spilt. Aside from the three, this guy on the phone seemed like the last one left. John was wondering where he could find this guy, but faint footsteps approached. Quiet and controlled. By the time he got to his feet, a man about 6 feet tall walked into the passage connecting the bank's lobby to the washroom area. He had light armor clinging to his big frame, an AK in his right hand, without a strap, and the handgun on his hip with a few knives in the camo vest. A surprise this is, Ajax whistled. The guy didn't even bother raising his rifle and just stood there, farming ore or something. I don't want trouble. John's hand went behind his back as the system panel appeared before him. You don't get to say that with a smile like that, my friend. A twisted smirk split his face, showing the gold-covered teeth and pale gums. A smile. John's brain worked overtime, trying to find a way forward. The distance between them was 10 meters. This man was different, he could feel it. Oh, is this your first time tasting blood? His chuckle echoed in the passage as he glanced at his defeated subordinates. Color me impressed. I don't know what you are yapping about. John stood straight, raising his left hand high before throwing 3 grenades towards the target with the right. But thanks for that shithead. Ajax's brow shot up as the grenades landed on the tiles. They landed on an angle and fanned out, forcing him to jump back in a hurry as these grenades had a wide area of attack. But what surprised him was the boy running straight at him. He didn't care for the grenades, he didn't care for his armed opponent. The heavy stomps had already covered 7 meters in that short moment, like he only had one goal. And that was crushing Ajax. Does he not know how grenades work? The man blinked at the relentless charge, but something clicked when he looked at those ferocious eyes. Even as the time for triggering passed, the grenades didn't go off. They weren't the same type his team carried, but he was familiar with the type and their trigger conditions. The only reason they wouldn't go off by now, as John rushed over them, was because they weren't real. Fuck, he cursed, rolling on his back before raising the AK, but John had already reached him. He swatted the AK away with a kick, already onto him as the rifle slid across the tiles. He had used the system shop to buy dud grenades and summoned them in his hidden hand while conversing. The pins flying up worked as a much better distraction than he expected, but what made the bigger difference was this guy taking him lightly. John grabbed onto the drawn handgun, twisting the muzzle away from his body. With a twist, John pressed the magazine release button, kicking it away before it hit the ground and slid the barrel back, ejecting the loaded bullet. But before he could bring up his right knee to snap Ajax's hand, the man released the handgun and slid back. That was marvelous. Ajax's eyes seemed to shine in a bloody way. But John wasn't in the correct mental space to converse. The only thing dominating his mind was how to step on this obstacle before him. Not even defeat, he had to step over it and crush it under his heel. This is bad. John's face started to hurt, the heart thumping in his chest got faster. His hand swung in a wide arc as he took a boxing stance, heading straight for Ajax's head. But the latter had his guard up. John's fist connected to the guard. A sharp crack split the silence as Ajax was slammed into the nearby wall. But he was smiling through his bloody teeth. He took the hit on purpose. In doing so, he created an opening. His steel-toed boots dug into the right side of John's ribcage, landing a clear and direct liver kick. Any normal or trained human would crumble to the ground by now. Ajax had seen the strongest of men whimper like a woman after being hit with this. But that didn't happen this time. John just stood upright, not a trace of pain or fear on his face. His body had already processed the kick, and the counter followed. The red circle expanded from his feet, zooming in on his opponent like a scope. Ajax felt chills break out over his body. The target was his chin. What would hit him, he wasn't sure. But he knew something would hit. Gwar. Even though he had completed the guard, the oncoming punch broke through. As his chin shattered, Ajax's eyes shook. That punch, he remembered it. He had been on the receiving end of it for most of his adolescence, right until that program was cancelled. Winter Soldier, it feels just like his hits. As blood and teeth choked his airway, Ajax's head struck the floor with a heavy thud as he passed out. 3-3 comments 0 vote. Your name, the end. Winter Soldier, it feels just like his hits. As blood and teeth choked his airway, Ajax's head struck the floor with a heavy thud as he passed out. Standing over him, John felt like his body was on fire. Sweat poured out of him as his breath hitched, his lungs reeling. His right arm was strained, hurting as his muscle had snapped. Just standing there took everything. But John wasn't allowed to fall. He walked out of the passage, standing under the gaze of the terrified civilians. His heart started to beat faster. It wasn't cause of the relief on their faces, nor was it his own relief at surviving. The reason for his heart beating so loudly, the reason for this euphoria that washed over him, the reason for this sense of weightlessness was his victory. He had crushed those that dared to stand proud before him, he had snapped the arrogance their weapons gave them. John had proven himself to be the stronger creature than them. At least that's what his body wanted him to think and revel in. Good thing I clamped my mouth shut. If I had said that shit out loud, I would have died from cringe. He finally came down from cloud 9. Owned skills, Hanma physique, awakening, 7%. His was now similar to a creature that thrived on being the strongest in the world. This entire bloodline craved that feeling, and carrying that blood himself, of course, John would feel that urge too. Just that he had no interest in doing that. He just wanted to go back home and write so he could share all those wonderful stories with the readers in this world. I don't want to fight again if possible. But he had learned that as long as he decided to live in this world, he had to deal with any problems thrown his way. John looked at the blinking system panel and then at the bank teller from before. Is my card ready yet? He needed that damned card, the cause of all his worries, right this instant. In a quiet neighborhood of Queens, Spider-Woman stealthily landed on the ledge of the open window in an apartment building, her rented room. Slipping inside in one fluid motion, she took off her mask, running her fingers through the sweaty blonde hair. Today was brutal. Gwen fell face up into the bed, her ribs ached with every breath, and the cuts on her legs and arms stung. There were a lot of false reports regarding attacks today, but she had found the real one in a hospital in Manhattan. Some terrorists led by Rhino who wanted to blow up the place. He could have just given me a call if he wanted my attention, why put others' lives at risk? Gwen groaned on the bed, thinking over the words that Guy spoke. There's a bomb in Empire State Bank, both of these bombs will blow up at the same time, so choose. Who will you save? Gwen had almost lost control for the first time. She had been doing this Spider-Woman gig for a while now, but today things went overboard. Playing with others' lives like that was truly despicable. The silver lining was that she had succeeded in stopping the bomb at the hospital, and the bomb planting at the bank was also stopped thanks to the efforts of a brave citizen. That was the police's public statement, at least. When she reached the Empire State Bank, she had noticed John walking with the police, especially with her father. The two went to the police station, and then the car dropped John at his apartment building. I didn't expect him to live this close. Gwen had followed the car, hoping to find out anything, but that hadn't worked. She could only make a deduction that John had been involved because of the special treatment. Still, she had her doubts after listening to injury reports on the radio scanner. Smashed noses, broken teeth, and shattered jaws, apparently one of them had no hope of eating solid food again. Plus, these were active mercenaries that came in guns blazing. Someone bubbly and funny like John beating them up so badly. No way that would happen. You just called a 6-foot guy bubbly, great going, Gwen. She could feel her face burning, maybe it was the exhaustion muddling her mind. Still, John definitely had the build. She couldn't deny that everything about him was attention-grabbing. The height bump aside, his shoulders were really wide and muscly. He looked like a top-tier athlete who could easily get into the university sports team. And because of the wind pulling his t-shirt back, she had also gotten a glimpse of his abs without meaning to. He has crazy definition there. Like, how is it possible? Gwen could still picture it in her mind, lost in her thought. But then realization dawned on her. Imagining the abs of the guy the first just followed home while lying in my bed, not my brightest moment. Gwen wished for a savior that could whisk her away from this unending sharp self-judgment. And the savior arrived, just in an unexpected form. A chapter. Gwen looked at the time, it was a little over midnight. The usual uploads from John Doe had been around 9:10 p.m., but not today. The writer must have had a tough day too. Gwen stretched her arms, trying to shake off the sleepiness. Now that she had noticed the upload, she had to read it. The moment Gwen clicked on the chapter link, her enthusiastic expression soured a little. The chapter started with adult Taki going through life, thinking that he saw someone he recognized at a train station before turning away. That part made Gwen sigh. This writer really knew how to rub it in. She continued reading regardless, following Taki's job interviews and his talk with Okudera. It made Gwen realize that over 5 years had passed. However, there was a detail that struck her like a hammer out of the blue. The split comet did destroy Itamori, however, no one died there. So Mitsuha is alive. Gwen leaned in, scrolling anxiously. The revelation was done so casually that she had to read 3 times just to make sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. Taki's entire POV has been filled with longing so far, longing for someone he doesn't even know. But now things were confirmed. Mitsuha was still alive. Gwen almost celebrated, but held back. She thought of this writer and how they had handled stuff so far. Her enthusiasm went down a notch, but only for a moment as she held onto the hope in her heart. And the next paragraph started with that ambiguous tone again. It was like 2 people speaking over one another. This time, however, there wasn't any indication. Gwen just felt it, and that feeling proved itself correct. Taki and Mitsuha were both leaning against the glass doors of the trains on their commute when they found each other, their trains going the opposite direction. It was like the world itself was trying to separate them. Gwen broke into a smile as she imagined them running around like fools, trying to find each other in the busy city like bumbling idiots. And they at last did find one another on a flight of stairs. Come on, Gwen's words were almost a prayer. She wanted to see this well. When they first met, Taki didn't know Mitsuha, and it ended badly. But this time, neither of them knew each other. Still, they should trust that feeling that had them running around until just a moment ago. Her heart almost dropped into her stomach when they walked past each other on the stairs, but her grip on the mouse tightened as they turned around. Both speaking at the count of 3. What's your name? The end. Gwen looked at the bold last letters while blinking in genuine goosebumps. Why end there? She wanted to roar once again. Where is the kiss? The marriage? Man. From the sound of it, Gwen was throwing a tantrum, but the wide smile on her lips said otherwise. In a way, this was the perfect ending for everyone who had followed Taki and Mitsuha's journey. They had to trust them to live the rest of it happily. Even if the start was rocky, as long as the ending was a happy one, what right did anyone have to complain? I think I'll sleep in today. Gwen leaned in the chair after a slow, breathy exhale. Her sour mood had disappeared, and the wounds didn't hurt so much anymore. No matter how tough it was, today ended on a happy note. And for Gwen, that alone was more than enough. 27 comments 0 vote. 5 centimeters per second. David Aderoju, that ending was peak. A wife of 2, talk about keeping us at the edge of our seats till the last moment. That's gotta be illegal. Talking Goonish, my sister in Christ, at a wife of 2, we got to talk about your name first. Edge is the truth 666, I love that ending. So edgy. Hopeless romantic 419, why didn't Taki and Mitsuha kiss at the end? We deserve that much service after all those cliffs. Matcha Realist, at Hopeless Romantic 419 I think that was the perfect ending. It can't get better than this. Gunnar Lord it definitely can. Idris Illa, I don't know what it Gunnarlord means, but I am scared of bro. JP Marine, thank you for the chapter. Pendeju, thank you for sharing such a touching work with us. Amanahak, I am willing to suspend the ruling on your kidnapping temporarily because of that ending. But know that the door to my basement is always open. Yeah, think I'll pass on that. John went through the comments with a wry smile. The last chapter had given everyone a clean ending. The handful of readers that he had were still talking about it while basking in that sense of relief after an uncertain anxiety. Even John, when he was writing your name, had that feeling of anxiety even if he knew the plot. And these were people who were reading it for the first time. Of course, their release would be through the roof. The EP counter kept rolling forward at a steady pace, with 1 EP every 67 minutes now. However, the big wave he had been waiting for had just arrived. Gwen Stacy is anxious plus 10 EP. Gwen Stacy is surprised by the revelation plus 20 EP. Gwen Stacy is feeling an immense wave of joy plus 50 EP. Gwen Stacy is uplifted after reading the ending and feels a little hopeful about tomorrow plus 80 EP. John sucked in a sharp breath, making his ribs hurt all over again. Gwen had given him 160 points all on her own. But his eyes were focused on the last notification. Feels a little hopeful about tomorrow. Well, being a spider hero wasn't for the faint-hearted. It was a guaranteed ticket to premium suffering. But watching her feel a little hope from this novel felt unexpectedly good. For writers, measuring the emotional impact of their works, or even something as simple as knowing if a reader enjoyed their work, was the hardest thing unless the readers decided to open up. Which was rare to say the least. But this system made it much clearer. Sure, John wasn't the one who had written your name, but he could still find joy in knowing that his fellow readers enjoyed a story just as much as he had. It was like recommending a work to your friend and watching them turn into a fan too. Truly the most rewarding feeling for any anime manga fan. Turning the PC off, John crashed on the bed. Thinking of Gwen reminded him of George Stacy, her father. He was one of the people who had arrived after getting a report of the terrorist attack. It seemed the report was made shortly after the attack happened, thanks to the teller stealthily pressing the emergency report button under the main desk while moving. Just thinking about the ordeal made his body hurt. The liver kick had done its damage, thankfully no ribs had cracked. His arm was a different story, though. He was sure he heard a crack when he gave Ajax the last punch, and the arm had swollen by the time he had gotten his bank card. But now it felt normal, aside from a slight swelling. Must be the increased healing speed. John looked at his own arm and recalled the sermon George Stacy had given him on the way to the station. About how he shouldn't have been reckless, and he could have died. John wished to shout at the top of his lungs that he knew that very well. It was just that his body was craving exactly that type of deadly action. Still, right after the fight ended and the pain kicked in, all the way back home, John didn't feel any urge for violence again. All he could deduce was that there was a specific trigger that turned him into that mode. Thinking back on the sudden lunge at the first terrorist, the reckless charge at Ajax without the use of a gun, and even the small incident with Flash. Once he started dissecting them, all these incidents had a common thread. They were looking down on me, John muttered, remembering that mockery in their eyes. The Hanma physique belonged to the strongest creature. It wasn't hubris. In the world of Baki, nothing came close to the Hanma. Trying to mock that lineage was like trying to fly near the sun. So, the bloodline comes with an innate sense of wanting to violently defend its honor. Gotcha, John sighed. As bad as it sounded, it wasn't like he had turned into a mindless brute. On the contrary, his mind was the clearest it had been in days during those fights. He could think strategically and follow through with clean precision that bordered on inhuman. The only downside, for him, was that euphoric feeling after winning. It just didn't sit well with him. But that was just his personality clashing with the primal instincts of the Hanma physique. The normal guy didn't think of becoming the strongest after all. They thought of the Roman Empire, about getting a salary big enough to let their fathers retire. They hoped to find a loving wife, and build a family of their own with children that would grow up well. John was a normal guy, a little nerdy, but normal. And he hoped he would stay like that even if he had been dropped in Marvel with a physique of battle monsters from an anime world. Still, even as he rolled on the bed, the only thing going through his mind was the fight he had today. It kept replaying in his head. Each replay made him discover ways he could have ended them faster, more brutally and dominantly. John's body muscles twitched slightly, as if he was doing the improved moves his mind had just envisioned. And it felt like his body was absorbing those moves, sharpening them on its own. At this point, he didn't even want to complain, as that would be like saying, "My steak is too juicy." After 20 minutes, when his mind finally had enough of brutalizing the terrorists, John sat at the edge of the bed and stretched his tense shoulders. He needed to read something to forget all that violence he had witnessed. This was another one of his dangerous habits. Hard times, just read till they pass. It helped sometimes, and other times, he just read some more. But the world of Marvel didn't have a lot of his favorite works. So, he could only take a deep breath and close his eyes. Growing up, John's house had a huge library, courtesy of his father. And he had spent a lot of time there between practice and school, then all of his time once his mom left, so much so that he basically had the place mapped out to the last shelf. And thanks to a little trick his father had taught him, Memory Palace, John was now back in that library. He looked around the tall shelves that extended into the ceiling, with a spiral staircase leading to the next floor. But John stayed on the current floor, feeling the cold floor on his bare feet. He turned to the shelf on his right. It was made of hard wood, with a subtle hint of pine. The shelves didn't have hardcover books or anything one would expect from this gothic-looking library. The books on the shelves were quite the opposite, with brightly colored spines and eye-catching lettering. This was the library John had built in his mind. Each book he had read was stored here, and he could access it at any given point to understand what made a work so special. And with the conclusion of Your Name still on his mind, the book his hand pulled from the shelf was another one of Makoto Shinkai's works. Nice, I was just thinking about what to release next, John smirked, looking at the title. 5 cm per second, this might have been the pull of the century. 25 comments 0 vote. Death. The next morning, John was out of bed before the first ray of sunlight entered his room. It was almost like his body wanted to race the sun, and it won. Never in my life did I think that 5 hours of sleep would be enough for me. His right hand felt completely normal, and his body was so refreshed that yesterday felt like a dream to him. Still, that wasn't the case. By the time he had left for university, George Stacy had given him a call. You sure about turning down the medal? Yes, I am certain, he answered. George asked him a few more questions, like if he ate anything and about his injuries. The call only ended after his well-being was confirmed and he refused the medal 3 more times. This was regarding his bravery, recklessness yesterday. The police department wanted to give him a medal for saving the people from the terrorists. Apparently, he had helped greatly in destroying a plan that could have led to many casualties, since the terrorists were planning to plant a bomb in 2 places at once. John could already guess that they probably wanted to trap Gwen into a dilemma, but he became the variable in that plan. And whoever ordered this surely had his eyes on the case. Putting my face out there is not a good choice. The silver lining was that the CCTV at the bank was not working at all, so he wasn't caught on video. And George Stacy had only asked him half-heartedly, like he just wanted to get it over with. He probably had some pressure from above for this. John would have considered it if there was a cash price, but there wasn't one. Stingy bastards. If the department wanted to use him for publicity, the least they could do was throw in some cash. He had the $5K in the bank. Actually, it had become $4.5K now. He had to buy clothes and enough food that could feed a family for a month. But to him, maybe it'll last 2 weeks, a big maybe at that. He really hoped some crowdfunding app arrived fast. There was still PayPal, but he felt a hint of shame asking for money like that since there wasn't exactly a precedent for this stuff yet. And even if he bought the coding skill and set out to create the app himself, John didn't have the passion, resources, or the time to run the thing. Should I get someone to make it? His gears started turning for a moment before he paused. He didn't have to worry about it that much. Maybe he'll just put a link to PayPal saying that he needed some funding to get illustrations done. Since he would be drawing them himself, he could claim the money for genuine work. He had been steadily getting used to drawing without feeling the disconnect. He had already gotten several private DMs, but as someone who had written in the Big 2030, he wasn't sure he could trust the copy-paste looking DMs saying, "I can already imagine your work in my head, it would work great as a comic." They were always a hotbed of scams, trying to fleece inexperienced and passionate writers. He would never fall for that shit again. John. As he passed the university gates, Peter came running from behind, catching up to him. "Are you feeling okay?" "All peachy." John nodded as realization dawned on Peter's face. I wasn't supposed to ask him that. Peter had seen John leave the scene in a police car and heard the details over the scanner. He hadn't met him at all yesterday. "I noticed you were outside the bank." "You did." Peter looked at the smile John had. "I was just nearby then, got attracted by the commotion." "I see." John had indeed noticed him. His senses were in overdrive, so he couldn't help but notice. "It doesn't look like he'll tell me if I ask. Better let it go." The conversation slowly drifted away from the bank and crashed right into Spider-Woman. "Isn't she amazing? The way she moves through the place, and what she does, it really opens one's eyes." Peter continued to ramble about the specifics. It looked like he had been following after Gwen's hero activities with unreal closeness. And right on cue, the hero herself arrived like a ghost. "I feel like if I leave you two alone one more time, I might get a marriage invitation," she said, placing her books on the desk. "Very funny, Gwen." John gave a dry laugh as Peter shook his head. Seemed like awkward jokes in her came in a package. "I try a bit," she chuckled. Her tone was light and upbeat. "What? I know it wasn't funny, okay." Gwen smiled while pushing his shoulder playfully. Because of the notifications, he knew the reason why that smile felt a bit wider today. It made him smile too. Now, the three of them conversed together. Spider-Woman, the terrorist attack, and the novel Your Name. Nothing was off the table. Going back to class after lunch, John felt his mood improving with each step. The weather was great. He had uploaded the first chapter of 5 cm per second by sneaking into the computer lab. Only after he had checked under every desk for a certain blonde girl, the EP was already starting to roll in. He had reached 550 EP, with Gwen's generous contribution, and the number was climbing up steadily. He was a bit over 200 EP away from completing the system mission. The PayPal link was also set up, and John didn't feel as much shame as he had expected. Money did take precedence over everything else. Shame wouldn't fill his stomach after all. But when he arrived at the lecture, Death stood in front of him. No, he wasn't talking about the actual Lady Death here. Right behind the kindly smiling professor, 2 words on the board looked at him like the Grim Reaper. Surprise test. Wallahi, I am cooked. John looked at the ceiling, his palms covering his mouth. The test happened in a blur, and soon John exited the classroom like a zombie. The result in his hand was as bad as he had expected. Even the professor seemed disappointed. Seemed like the John from before was a good student. That was the one thing that pricked him the wrong way. John himself ran away from all things science, unless it was the sci-fi genre. But the damned John from here seemed good at it. The John Grayson here has a full background, growing up in an orphanage, then becoming independent, even the rented apartment. It almost felt like John had existed in this world long before he had come around. The only way to explain it was that the system had worked its magic. For that, he was grateful. Not having the TVA busting down his door was good news. Still, there were other people he had to watch out for. That's something. Gwen looked at him like she was wondering how he got in on the scholarship program with that score. My face, John said. What? Gwen tilted her head. I got in thanks to my face. A confident smirk formed on his lips. Show off. At least she didn't deny it. I'm sure you'll do well next time. I wouldn't be so sure of that. John smiled wryly. Too bad the shop didn't have a skill on biochemistry. Watching him sigh from the side, a thoughtful expression overtook Gwen's face. Maybe he was having trouble studying since he moved to New York from South Dakota, so suddenly, a new place could affect a student's studying proficiency. He also didn't have many friends in class, and she had only heard him talk for the first time just a few days ago. Honestly, how had she not noticed someone like him so far? Even if she left his body aside, he had a handsome, almost suave look going on. And it wasn't just her. Peter, too, only had vague memories of him being in the background at the start of the month. Could be that he had a hard time integrating and withdrew in the back. That seemed like the only logical explanation. But things were different now. If it's okay with you, she got his attention, contemplating each word. I can help you study, no guarantee it would help, though. Want to support me and read ahead? Visit patreon.com/c/overthemoon69 to read 20 chapters ahead. To be continued.